This Skyline belongs to my mate Reese. It's got pretty awful suspension in it, so today we're going to put in some HSDs. As you can see, Reese is quite passionate about Hello Kitty, and he also believes in having matching thongs for every car he owns. First thing you have to do is measure the height of the vehicle before you start. Reese is pretty happy with the height of the car already, so we have the numbers written down and we can make sure we've got the same height when we finish. Next important thing to do is put the car up on a couple of jack stands, because it is really uncomfortable when the car falls on you. So here are the old coilovers in the front. As you can see, there's quite a lot of oil leaking out of them, which will explain why the car bottoms out pretty much every time you hit a decent bump. Also makes it feel pretty unstable. So pulling the coilovers out of the front is pretty simple in a Skyline. Because they don't have struts in the front, there's no camber tops to worry about. It's got two bolts at the top and one at the bottom. Bottom nut at the front is a 17mm. Usually need a breaker bar to get it off, but whoever put these on didn't tighten them up very much. At the top you've got a couple of 14mm. Once again, not very tight. Easy as that. By the look of it, this coilover's lost pretty much all the oil that was ever in it. Okay, here's our replacement coilover. It's a HSD HR type. Basically a similar design insofar as they're both a full tap damper, which means that you do all of your height adjustment at the base here rather than moving the spring seat. The HRs have got a pillow ball type top mount, whereas these old G4s have a rubber bush. These are also a large monotube type damper with a 44mm piston. Gives a lot better control. So the next thing we need to do is measure the length from the top of the top mount to the top of the pin mount at the bottom. 443mm. So we'll adjust the new HSDs to the same length, since Reese wants the car at the same height. Okay, that's the same now. Won't tighten up completely yet because there'll probably be some small adjustments. The spring rates may well not be the same, so we can do all of that once it's actually in the car. I normally like to set the preload on the spring before putting the shock in. These are a 200mm free length. I generally recommend having about 5mm of preload on them, which is enough to take up any sag that there might be the first few weeks. As you can see, it's really only as tight as you can get it by hand. Top nuts on loosely first. You can see with the HSDs, one side of the base is longer than the other. That's the side that goes on first. This is a fairly fundamental part of your suspension, so don't be afraid to do it up pretty tightly. So the damper adjustment is at the top here. Basically turn that all the way anti-clockwise, puts it at the minimum setting. We usually like to start with about 6 clicks from there. And make sure you've got the same setting left and right. So we've got both the coilovers on now. Next thing to do, chuck the wheels back on and see if the heights are right. A little bit of advice. Whenever you're putting wheels back on a car, do them up properly, even if you're planning to take them off again in a couple of minutes. So otherwise you might forget. It's actually 10mm lower than it was before, so we're going to have to wind them up a little bit. Now the good news with this type of coilover is you don't actually have to take it out to adjust the height, because you can just loosen it, turn the whole body of the coilover to change the length. Now in this case, measuring here, we've got about 100mm. We want to get an extra 10mm of height, measuring from the wheel to the edge of the guard. To do that you only need about another 5mm of length here, because it's not a 1:1 ratio. Yep, that's 105. So might as well lock it off there and set the other side the same way and see how that went. There you've got these two spanners come with the kit. She used to tighten the collars. And just as tight as you can get them by hand is plenty. Yeah, that's all done. Let's see how she sits now. Spot on. In the back we don't have coilovers at all, just some lowered springs. But much as in the front, you've just got the one bolt at the bottom and a couple of bolts up the top. Unfortunately on an R33, to get at the top bolts you have to pull out the rear shelf, which means taking out the back seat first. To do this, first you've got to take out the base, which has a couple of bolts just at the front, and then it pulls out. And next you've got just a bolt on either side at the bottom of the backrest, and the whole thing lifts out. So with the seat back out, you can finally see where the top of the coilover is. Pretty amazing that Nissan thought this was a good place to put the bolts. But you're probably going to need something like this and a small ratchet to get the top bolts off. In this car, it's got 13mm nuts on top, but there's not really any guarantee that every R33 will be the same. And out she comes. The problem we have here is because the rear is factory style shock, it's very long travel, it's got a lot more droop than a coilover does, so we can't use it as a guideline for setting the length of the coilover. Unfortunately, you just have to take a guess and then work it out from there. Even though we are only taking a guess, still a good idea to measure so you've got something to go by later. And we've got 610 there. If you haven't got somebody to help you while you're doing this, you can basically fit the coilover into the top holes and then just wedge it against the suspension, so you can tighten up the top bolts before you have to put on the bottom. So once again, we've got the longer part of the base facing towards the hub, and to bring the hub up to the coilover, the easiest thing is just to use a jack. Okay, let's see how we did. Okay, it looks like we're sitting about 10 mil lower than we want to, so I'll have to wind it up again. Now the ratio of the suspension in the rear is not quite the same as in the front, so if we want to raise the car by 10 millimeters, we need to increase the length of the coilover by more than 5, probably more like 7 or 8 millimeters. So right now we're showing about 235 in the back, so I'll bring that up to about 242 and see how that goes. It's about 242 now. And of course, before you put the back seat in again, just double check all the bolts and check that you've set the damping the same on left and right, because it is a real pain in the neck to do it again. Okay, so Reese has decided he's happy with the height of the car. Because we haven't changed the height more than a couple of millimeters, you don't need to do a wheel alignment on it. But if you're changing from standard suspension to coilovers, you need to do a wheel alignment when you're finished. Other than that, easy job.